Before the Fellowship was the greatest story you've never heard. I'm Cameron.
I'm Dan.
And I'm Greg.
Thanks for joining us, Greg. Glad you're here. Join us as we read and react to the Silmarillion by J.R.R. Tolkien. Last time we read more about the happenings in Beleriand. The Nandor, Telperion elves. Let me say that again. The Nandor, Telperion elves who remained in Middle-earth, eventually reached Thingol in Beleriand. They dwelt in Osiriand, the Seven Rivers, below the Blue Mountains in the east. Morgoth, now returned to Angband, sent his forces to attack the Sindar. Surrounded, Thingol asked for help from the Nandor, and they successfully fought off Melkor's army, yet with heavy losses. The Nandor decided to stay out of the violent affairs of others, and became known as Leoquendi, the Green Elves. Melian used her power to create an invisible wall of protection around Doriath, just as Fëanor and his ships landed in Middle-earth. Today we begin Chapter 11 of Quenta Silmarillion, which can be found on page 98 of the second edition. It is told that after the flight of Melkor, the Valar sat long unmoved upon their thrones in the Ring of Doom. But they were not idle, as Fëanor declared in the folly of his heart. For the Valar may work many things with thought rather than with hands, and without voices and silence they may hold counsel one with another. Thus they held vigil in the night of Valinor, and their thought passed back beyond Ea, and forth to the end. Yet neither power nor wisdom assuaged their grief, and the knowing of evil in the hour of its being. And they mourned not more for the death of the trees than for the marring of Fëanor. Of the works of Melkor, one of the most evil. For Fëanor was made the mightiest in all parts of body and mind, in valor, in endurance, in beauty, in understanding, in skill, in strength, and in subtlety alike, of all the children of Iluvatar, and a bright flame was in him. The works of wonder for the glory of Arda that he might otherwise have wrought only Manwë might in some measure conceive. And it was told by the Vanyar who held vigil with the Valar, that when the messengers declared to Manwë the answers of Fëanor to his heralds, Manwë wept and bowed his head. But at that last word of Fëanor, that at the least the Noldor should do deeds to live in song forever, he raised his head, as one that hears a voice far off, and he said, "So shall it be. Dear bought those songs shall be accounted, and yet shall be well bought, for the price could be no other. Thus even as Eru spoke to us, shall beauty not before conceived be brought into Ea, and evil yet be good to have been." But Mondo said, "And yet remain evil. To me shall Fëanor come soon." But when at last the Valar learned that the Noldor had indeed passed out of Aman and were come back into Middle-earth, they arose and began to set forth in deeds those counsels which they had taken in thought for the redress of the evils of Melkor. Then Manwë bade Yavanna and Nienna to put forth all their powers of growth and healing, and they put forth all their powers upon the trees. But the tears of Nienna availed not to heal their mortal wounds, and for a long while Yavanna sang alone in the shadows. Yet even as hope failed and her song faltered, Telperion bore at last upon a leafless bough one great flower of silver, and Laurelin a single fruit of gold. These Yavanna took, and then the trees died, and their lifeless stems stand yet in Valinor, a memorial of vanished joy. But the flower and the fruit Yavanna gave to Aule, and Manwë hallowed them. And Aule and his people made vessels to hold them and preserve their radiance, as is said in the Narsillion, the song of the sun and moon. These vessels the Valar gave to Varda, that they might become lamps of heaven, outshining the ancient stars, being nearer to Arda. And she gave them power to traverse the lower regions of Ilmen, and set them to voyage upon appointed courses above the girdle of the earth, from the west unto the east, and to return. These things the Valar did, recalling in their twilight the darkness of the lands of Arda, and they resolve now to illumine Middle-earth, and with light to hinder the deeds of Melkor. For they remembered the Avari that remained by the waters of their awakening, and they did not utterly forsake the Noldor in exile. And Manwë knew also that the hour of the coming of men was drawn nigh. And it is said indeed that even as the Valar made war upon Melkor for the sake of the Quendi, so now, for that time, they forbore for the sake of the Hildor, the aftercomers, the younger children of Ilúvatar. For so grievous had been the hurts of Middle-earth in the war upon Utumno, that the Valar feared lest even worse should now befall, whereas the Hildor should be mortal, and weaker than the Quendi to withstand fear and tumult. Moreover, it was not revealed to Manwë where the beginning of men should be, north, south, or east. Therefore the Valar sent forth light, but made strong the land of their dwelling. Isil, the Sheen, the vineyard of old named the Moon, flower of Telperion and Valinor, and Anar, the fire golden, fruit of Laurelin, they named the sun. But the Noldor named them also Rana, the wayward, and Vasa, the heart of fire, that awakens and consumes. For the sun was set as a sign for the awakening of men and the waning of the elves, but the moon cherishes their memory. The maiden whom the Valar chose from among the Maiar to guide the vessel of the sun was named Arien, and he that steered the island of the moon was Tilion. In the days of the trees, Arien had tended the golden flowers in the gardens of Vana, and watered them with the bright dews of Laurelin. But Tilion was a hunter of the company of Orome, and he had a silver bow. He was a lover of silver, and when he would rest, he forsook the woods of Orome, and going into Lorien, he lay in dream by the pools of Este, in Telperion's flickering beams. And he begged to be given the task of tending forever the last flower of silver. Arien, the maiden, was mightier than he, and she was chosen because she had not feared the heats of Laurelin, and was unhurt by them, being from the beginning a spirit of fire, whom Melkor had not deceived nor drawn to his service. Too bright were the eyes of Arien for even the Eldar to look on. And leaving Valinor, she forsook the form and raiment, which like the Valar she had worn there. And she was as a naked flame, terrible in the fullness of her splendor. Isil was first wrought and made ready, and first rose into the realm of the stars, and was the elder of the new lights, as was Telperion of the trees. Then for a while the world had moonlight, and many things stirred and woke that had waited long in the sleep of Yavanna. The servants of Morgoth were filled with amazement, but the elves of the outer lands looked up in delight. And even as the moon rose above the darkness in the west, Fingolfin let blow his silver trumpets and began his march into Middle-earth, and the shadows of his host went long and black before them. Tilion had traversed the heavens 7 times, and thus was in the furthest east, when the vessel of Arien was made ready. Then Anar arose in glory, and the first dawn of the sun was like a great fire upon the towers of the Pelóri. The clouds of Middle-earth were kindled, and there was heard the sound of many waterfalls. Then indeed Morgoth was dismayed, and he descended into the uttermost depths of Angband, and withdrew his servants, sending forth great reek and a dark cloud to hide his land from the light of the day star. So, in summary, the Valar mourn not only the loss of the two trees, but also Morgoth's evil deeds and Fëanor's corruption, most of all. They're able to save one flower from Telperion and one fruit from Laurelin. And they work together to use these to create the moon and the sun. Isil, the moon, is finished first, and Tilion steers in the sky. Tilion steers it in the sky. It rises in the west, just as Fingolfin and his host reach Middle-earth. Then Anar, the sun, is completed, and Arian, the Maya, steers it in the sky.
Okay, I wanted to talk about this another line right here at the beginning. There's a lot to talk about here, I think, but this shortly after what we just discussed. And they, being the Valar, mourned not more for the death of the trees than for the marring of Fëanor.
Yeah.
Of the works of Melkor, one of the most evil. And so now I think this is the second time where Tolkien is like called his work particularly evil. One was the creation of the orcs through like torture and mutilation of elves. That was like the first time that he specifically pointed out this is one of the most evil things that Melkor did. And then this one too, where the marring of Fëanor is one of the most evil things that Melkor did.
Yeah, and when it mentioned the elves being corrupted into orcs earlier, it said it was the most hateful thing to Iluvatar.
Mm-hmm. And
what's interesting is it's not the evil things the orcs do or the evil thing, Morgoth did, with Ungoliant killing the trees and causing all this havoc. It's this internal twisting that is most hateful to Iluvatar.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there, and I think we've talked about Fëanor enough that maybe we don't need to go into too much depth, but just the bright flame that was in him, and how I like this point at the end, that evil may yet be good, or evil yet be good to have been, is kind of this line at the end, that good things could come from these evil things. And then Mondo says, and yet remain evil. To me, shall Fëanor come soon. And that's a very intriguing line there, because Fëanor is banished from Valinor. So if he's going to come to him soon, something big is about to happen.
Yeah. Well, what was interesting to me is that this is hearkening back to the oath that Fëanor took. And it mentions that the Noldor, this is what Fëanor said earlier in the story. I don't know if you remember this, but the Noldor should do deeds to live in song forever. So it's like, yeah, we're going to our destruction, we're going to our woe, and the doom of Mondos is going to be upon us, but they're going to sing about us. And then it's interesting because when Manwë heard that, he stops weeping as like Fëanor's, leaving with his host. He stops weeping, raises his head and says, "So shall it be." Mm-hmm. And that's where he brings up the idea of evil so that good may come.
Yeah.
Like the evil that he's going to do will result in some good.
I was thinking about this the other day. I feel kind of bad saying this, but someone I knew, I mean, he's still around, I guess. I haven't talked to him in quite a long time, but I really struggled with him. He kind of acted like a bit of a jerk sometimes, most of the time. Dan is this guy, but he was like incredibly talented. And it just seemed like, oh, what a terrible thing that like, we were meant to be collaborating, and he's just so obstinate at times. And it just made me think like, that is, if I were more talented, I might, be tempted to have these same, trip up in the same ways that Fëanor has. Like, he's just this raging fire, and it just gets pointed in the wrong direction a little bit, and it's just destructive, you know.
Yeah, I don't know how personal we want to get, but I've been thinking a very similar thing with filmmaking, and like sometimes I'll think like, oh, why can't I be such and such a person in such and such a role in such and such a place, which is a role that's more successful, seen by more people, have more accomplishments.
Mm-hmm.
And that same word comes back to me, which is because it would destroy you. And actually, my spiritual director said something very similar. He's like, you're not ready for it. And it comes back to, well, anyways, I don't want to go into that because I could be here all night.
Well, yeah, it reminds me too of this idea. I think it's proposed by like Carl Sagan or something, who said, our increasingly technological world, we've become more and more advanced, but we haven't reached technological maturity or like moral maturity. So we have these like powerful devices at our disposal, but we haven't quite developed the wisdom to use them. You'll use these things well, and that's a dangerous time to be. Yeah.
I want to draw our attention to how they create the sun and the moon, because people might not have picked up on it just through the reading. So Nienna and Yavanna, right? They're the two, and they're Nienna is the one who like is the queen or the valier of sorrow, right, and prayer. Right. And Yavanna is the one of growth, right?
Yeah.
Nature. Yep. So they come together, and then they sing, don't they? What do they do?
Well, Nienna cries. She cries on it, all over it.
Yeah. Nienna cries and Yavanna sings.
Right. As is fitting for them.
Which is actually how me and Dan met.
Which one of you is crying and which one of you is singing?
I started singing and Dan just started crying and ran away. Or something like that. And then, so what happens is nothing happens. And then after a little bit, there's this little flower. Or I don't know if it's a little flower, but it says, at last upon a leafless bough, a great flower of silver and a single trait of gold. So is it just one flower?
I think so, yeah. I think it's just the one flower.
With a little gold fleck on it or something. And then they use that to craft the sun and the moon. And the moon is described as an island. It's really interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's there's like some weird details here that don't quite add up yet. I think there's more to read, but it says, once the moon is ready first, and we've heard about this before, that when Fingolfin and his crew finally land in Middle Earth, the moon is rising for the first time. But it says the one the Maiar who Tilion is the Maiar who carries the moon around in the sky, and he had already traversed the heaven 7 times. But the way it describes it too, the way that they were directed was they just fly back and forth from west to east, and then back to the west, and then back. Like, it's not, and it is like flat. It seems like, right? The world is flat, but the way that it's described, there's no night really. It's just the moon just goes back and forth across the sky.
Right. Yeah, that's right. That seems how it's described. And then this connects us to what we read after the Fingolfin was left behind when the ships were burned in Lothgar. Fëanor burns the ships, and then Fingolfin travels through the Helcaraxe, the grinding ice, and then as he's arriving on Middle Earth, that's when the moon rises above the darkness in the west.
Mhm.
It's so cool, the providence
Yeah.
behind the moment.
Yeah. I kind of maybe jumped ahead too fast from what you were talking about the Valar working on this, because the other part too is that Ale, the craftsman, right? He's like the great
Right.
builder. He kind of builds the mechanism for these things to work, and then Manwë hallows them. And not all the Valar are involved in this, but the ones that are, it's like each of their thing. It's their wheelhouse. We'll have to look up. Maybe someone can tell us what the word Narcelion means, because that sounds like Narsil, right? The sword.
Dan,
Narcelion says the song of the sun.
I tried to look it up, but there isn't much on it, as far as I can tell. It's not,
all right. Well,
I don't think it's
we'll
detailed
talk about it in our Discord. Join our Discord, and we'll talk about it more. I noticed that Isil is the first part of Isildur, so I'd be interested to hear what Isil means. Who's the one who names the moon?
Yeah, that's right. Isil is the. That's funny. That's like one of the few times that we've heard about the Vanyar since everything went down, because they're just kind of the ones over there. But
yeah, Isil is the name of the moon, actually, not the one who named the moon. Might be both.
Oh, is it? Oh, is it?
It's both. Yeah.
Oh.
So was he named after?
Oh, I see. It's just saying the Vanyar in general called the moon Isil, the Sheen, and also the moon. Right? Is that right?
Oh, his Isildur means devoted to the moon.
Oh, it's so cool.
Yeah, that's cool.
Tolkien etymology is cool.
Yeah.
So Dur means devoted.
Sure.
Cool.
Dur. Yeah. How about the coming of men?
Did the men come?
No, not yet. But well,
how about that?
It's talked about. I like this point that it makes, that the Valar went to war with Melkor for the sake of the elves, and they made the sun and the moon mainly for the sake of men, who they knew were coming. Not exclusively for them. They also made them for the Avari, who never came to Valinor to begin with.
Yeah, it's interesting because what happened after the war with Melkor, when all the destruction to Middle Earth happened, then they told the children of Iluvatar, the elves, to come to Valinor for like their safety and security. But then Middle Earth is kind of left alone. Fëanor goes to Middle Earth, and there's going to be the men who come to Middle Earth eventually. So yeah, they make these lights to govern Middle Earth. That's interesting.
Maybe I read this a little bit wrong, but it seems like what it's suggesting is that because men are weaker, they're mortal and they're weaker than the Quendi to withstand fear and tumult, the Valar didn't want to really be as involved directly. Am I reading that right? Like, that's kind of how I read it. Like, they didn't want to be, like, Orome, right, has the horse, Nahar, and like was riding around going crazy in Middle Earth, and the elves feared him. Some of them feared him. The men would be just like petrified and never move from where they started if the Valar are just like roaming the land. But it made me think too, maybe that's a feature from Iluvatar and man, because it seems like one of the distinguishing features of man in this is that man has like a lot of freedom and has ability to chart the course of his life and affect fate in ways that the Eldar don't seem to be.
Yeah, right. Like that's a mark of Fëanor. And are you saying that's a mark of the men as well? The aftercomers?
Yeah, the men. Yeah, of the men. So what I'm saying is, like, although the Valar have their own reason for not being as involved directly, it also serves this greater purpose of men being masters of their own fates.
I see. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's cool. Well, any final thoughts?
I can't find the bit that described Fëanor. I wanted to
Oh, is that the beginning?
Is it right at the beginning?
The first paragraph.
Yeah, for Fëanor was made the mightiest in all parts of body and mind. That part?
Yeah.
In the middle of the first paragraph.
Yeah. Got it. What do you think Tolkien wants us to kind of take away from the fact that he's mighty, beautiful, intelligent, and yet kind of troubled? Like, do you think Tolkien had like his character's supposed to? Do you think it's just character? It's a complicated character for me, a complicated sense, or is there some kind of thing, some kind of mythos that he's trying to show through that?
I think I've talked about Fëanor in a way that I may have said something that I don't necessarily think, which is that his strength and all those qualities that make him great are what lead to him kind of falling. I don't think that, and I don't think that's what Tolkien's saying. What I'm saying is, because he's powerful, him being twisted or marred, as it said, the effects are more destructive than if like a hobbit were twisted, right? And I was thinking about this recently too with the character Saruman. Is similar. He was like the greatest of the leader of the wizards, right? And I always thought that when I was like young and watching the Lord of the Rings movies and stuff, I thought like, what a shame that their greatest ally turned before they even really got started. Like if he were on their side the whole way, it would have maybe been a little bit easier, you know. They wouldn't have had to kill tens of thousands of Uruk-hai first. But there's something about that. There's like a danger that's there, that's present in the powerful, that's not present in the weak.
Yeah. What was it? C.S. Lewis had something about this in some of his writings about if you think of a dog being a bad dog, it can be bad and its destruction is pretty bad. A kid being bad is probably less bad than a dog being bad because a dog is likely to bite and rip and attack. But then you take a higher being like a man, and when he's gone sour or bad, then it can be really, really bad. And then he takes that further. You take a higher being like an angel, and it going bad because of its power, its beauty, its might. It's really, really, really bad. So in a sense, there's that kind of mythos present in the character of Fëanor, where we're seeing this, you know, to quote Count Dooku, twice the pride, double the fall. Like, so
he hasn't been mentioned yet, though.
You're right.
That's a spoiler.
Yeah, because he's actually in the Lord of the Rings, right?
Yeah, in episode 2. Yeah.
Okay, good. Yeah,
we're getting there.
Saruman, right?
Don't quote Star Trek in this podcast.
Okay.
So no, I think that's right, and I'm not sure necessarily that Tolkien is trying to say something more than that, but I think something that would be interesting for us is to try to be aware of that as we go forward in the story. Like, how has Fëanor's greatness led to evil things, and how have those evil things produced good things too?
Well, I think it's clearer actually in that first paragraph, because right after it says, of the works of Melkor, one of the most evil, regarding the marring of Fëanor, it says right after that, for Fëanor was made the mightiest in all parts of body and mind in Valar. So it's like, because he's made the mightiest, that this is worse than the destruction of the trees. It shows that the creation of Fëanor is a greater creation than the trees. Because the trees are a creation of a creation. Fëanor is a creation of Iluvatar and was made mighty in all these things: valor, endurance, beauty, etc. And a bright flame.
So it's showing the kind of sin of Melkor as just being, this is why it's hideous.
He twisted a person.
Yeah, and not any person, but the most beautiful of this particular type of creature.
He is the most beautiful.
So this is what I was kind of saying earlier, but I didn't say it in as nice of words as you guys just laid it out. You can
say it to me. Just say it, Greg. Come on, let's have it out.
No, no. It really is another person, but but okay. So think of it this way: it specifically said in the reading that Morgoth didn't care about the Telperion very much because they were weaker than the Noldor. He wanted to corrupt the most powerful things.
Yeah.
And so in that sense, Fëanor being the mightiest of all creatures, he was the prime target of Melkor from the beginning, right? He was the one who hated him the most. They hated each other the most. And I think that's true of us too. Those of us who are just extreme, on the 99th percentile of these gifts and talents, where those of I'm counting myself among the 1% here. No, I'm just kidding. But those people who are just immensely gifted and talented probably are under the most attack, on a human level, from people around them who are trying to push them for their own purposes. On a spiritual level, So
it also so this is from episode 5. We read that Melkor hated the sea, for he could not subdue it. He wants to control everything. Right. He wants to be the king, the lord of the world, and if he can't control it, he hates it. And and with Fëanor, he feels this competition because he's also a leader, so he hates him.
Do you think Jack Dawson from Titanic hated the sea as well? I think he did.
Not as much as Rose.
Yeah, can you pull up the song? All right. If you like what you hear, then never let go. And never let go of that play button. I don't know. That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. So it's still paused.
And don't tell them play. Because...
okay, just click the play button and let go of it. Yeah. Don't click it again because it'll pause it. And then after you follow those instructions, rate us 3 Silmarils out of 3. Go ahead and watch the podcast on YouTube. We have a YouTube channel where you can see my blue lights and Dan's cool beard and Greg's dapper style. Join the conversation on our Twitter and brand new Discord channel. Links are in the description. And send any comments or questions to beforethefellowship@gmail.com. Join us next week as we read the greatest story you've never heard, The Titanic, The Silmarillion by J.R.R. Tolkien.